Okay, welcome back to Mixing the Wood Brothers in Universal Audio Luna. In the last video, we were checking phase polarity and we went through the gain structure, made sure everything was ready to go, and so this time we're ready to mix. Okay, so I have done a few things in the background before we started. Actually, this is the second or third time of me making this video, so I'm going to walk you through those real fast. I took all the drums, I sent them to a drum sub. The basses I sent to a bass sub. Everything else is going to the main. You will also see that the drum room is going to the main without going to the drum sub first. That's just something that I like to do if there's a nice room sound going on, and we'll get into that later. Okay, let's go in and look at the subs here, the sub mixes, and take a listen to it as it's going. There is no sum going on any of these buses, and so let's take a listen to with no processing at all. Okay, so that's a pretty rough mix. Let's turn on the summing this time. I'll start playing and then turn it on.
Looking at the big sky, listening to the smoke alarm. Well, you wonder what happened. Your heart must have jumped the track.
Okay, good. I have the high impedance on both of the normal subs here. On the main out, I'm using the low impedance. I had to trim that back a little bit, just because the low impedance really gives some cool mojo on the main bus. Okay, so let's move on to the tape. I have put in a tape here on the Studer. I'm using the 15 IPS on the Bass F900 formula, which I've always found to be a great formula for heavy sounds and rock and roll and stuff like that. On the inside here, I'm pushing a little bit in, and I've compensated by using the link here. Let's listen to it without tape again, and then I'll put it in. Okay, it's already coming together real fast just with the summing and the tape. Okay, so now on the inserts, let's kind of walk through what I've done here. On the drums, this is where I kind of started, the drums and the bass. On the drums, let's pull those up real fast. I'm just going to solo everything, and then we'll listen to it with just the tape and the summing, and then I'll start going through what I've done here on the processing. I'm going to start with the overheads. I have put a Neve 1073 on here. I pulled the line gain up a little bit, so I had to compensate here. I'm putting a little bit of high end on the 12,000, the 12K shelf. I'm pulling a little bit out at 700 hertz. Left this alone. Actually, I probably was messing around with it and I just left it on. I am cutting though at 50 hertz down here. So let's listen to that without it first and then with it. Just giving a little bit more life. I've also put a Neve 33609 on here. Let me turn this on. I'm going to bypass it first, and it's barely doing anything, by the way. It's at a 1.5:1 ratio, very fast recovery, or the fastest it'll go. And here we go. It's really just there as a tone box more than anything. Okay, so from the overheads, I started adding in the kick drums and the snare. So let's Let's listen to that right fast. On the kick drum here, what I am doing first is I'm rolling off a little bit of the unwanted low end. That's all I'm doing with the Pro Q2. Now on the API, I like the API for having a punchy sound, and this one is my favorite one for that. It's got a proportional Q, which means that if you're kind of looking at an EQ, I'll do it here. Normally when you hit a point and you drag it up like this on an EQ, you get these little curves that come down here. Now a proportional Q actually gets narrower as you go higher. So it can get pretty pointy sounding, and it sounds great actually on things like drums. Let me get rid of that right fast. And so what I've done with the 550A, as you will see here, I've at 5K, I have raised that by 2 dB. 0.8, that is 800 hertz. I've raised 800 hertz by about 2 dB. And at 50 hertz, I've raised it by 6 dB. I also have the high frequency shelf engaged instead of a bell curve, so it's doing a shelf instead of a bell. Had to compensate a little bit for that. Let me turn this on, and then we'll bypass it first, and I'll put it in. Just giving it a little bit of body. And let's listen to the other kick. This is the kick out. So I've done basically the same thing. I've cut out some low end that we don't want, and I'm using the Waves Sheps 73 to do a similar thing here, where I've raised the high shelf a little bit, not much. The mids are at 4.8K, a little bit of point right there. The low end at 220. That's the low mids really, and I'm not using the high pass filter on this. I'm just letting it go. So this is with it off. It's just really accentuating that point a little bit. So both of those together. All right. Those with the overheads. Okay, sounding pretty groovy. Right on. So snare top. Let's listen to the snare. Okay, so the first thing I'm working with the snare here, I've got the Helios going here, and I'm at 10K. I'm raising that up at 4. 3.5 kilohertz. I'm a little bit of that on the peak there. I've engaged the bass, but it's not really doing anything. It's got a, if you do that, it's got about a, I don't know, like a 3 dB bump in the low end. That sounds kind of cool. Let me turn this on, and we'll bypass it first, and then we'll listen to it. Right, cool. Got a little bit more in your face right there. On this one, I'm using the Waves version of the 550A, and I am at the 7 kilohertz. I'm going up by 2 dB. I'm not doing anything else really here. All right, on the 1176 for the snare, I have the release pretty fast, a medium attack, and I'm just getting a little bit of compression on that attack. Okay, let's listen to that with the overheads now. All right, cool. Now on these other tracks, the snare bottom, I was listening a lot, and we'll listen to it here in a second. I don't see any benefit to having the snare bottom. Let me I'll just solo up the drums here. It has this ring to it that I don't dig, so I'll let you hear that by itself, and it sounds like this. And that's not really a sound I think they're going for here, so I'm just going to pull that out right now. Same kind of thing for the hi-hats. If I were to solo up the overheads, it has a tambourine part on it, so I'm going to leave it there. On this Pro Q2 here, I'm high passing around 200 hertz, and I'm going to leave that about right where it is. As far as I know, and as far as going through the song a few times, they're not really hitting any of the toms. So I'm just going to leave those out right now unless I want them for some sort of space or something. But I think we're getting plenty of that with overheads in the room. So I'm going to hide those tracks. I don't need them, so I don't want them getting in my way. Okay, I'm going to turn off this processing right fast, and we'll listen to it without the processing and then with what we've done so far. Now let's take a look at the room and see what I've done on that. Let me turn this off here. The room I'm really high passing again on the low stuff, just to get rid of it. I'm gonna solo it right fast. Using the API 560 to kind of make this little I'm pushing a little bit of the low end. I'm killing some of the mud here, and then kind of pulling out some of that harshness in the 4K and 2K region, and adding some air at the top, which we kind of like in the room. So here's what that sounds like with it on. Okay, so now I have a distressor on here, and the distressor is doing a little bit of compression using the distortion. These are second order distortion harmonics here. I have it on the nuke setting, and let's listen to that without it first, and then I'll put it in. It's actually pulling up the bass guitar a little bit in the room, and it's settling down a few other things. It's not really doing much, but and that's why it is going to the main straight. So I don't want it going through the drum sub. So now I'm going to mute that. Let's listen to just the drums, and then I'll show you what I've done on the drum sub here. I've put a distressor on it, by the way, also on nuke, and I'm going to turn it off. Now what this is doing, you can see here in the mix, I have it mostly on the dry side, so it's running in parallel, and sometimes it's hitting it pretty hard, but what I'm wanting it to do is give sort of a pump and make it sound really loud, you know, because it's a loud band, so I'm wanting it to really have some energy going.
to the smoke alarm. Well, you wonder what happened, your heart